Last April, we listened to retired Army General and former DICT Secretary Eliseo Rio explain his reasons for concluding that there was automated cheating in last year's elections. Since then, I think it is fair to say that his allegations, shared with ex-COMELEC Commissioner Gus Lagman and former Finex President Franklin Isaac, have gained some traction. Last week, presidential candidate Ping Lacson added his voice to the chorus of concern. But was there, in fact, automated cheating in the May 2022 elections? To zero in on one of Secretary Rio's main discoveries, the use of a private internet protocol or IP address to transmit precinct election returns. Is that a fact? Is that a crime? Is that proof of election fraud? Good evening. I'm John Neri and you are in the Public Square. I do not question the patriotism or the civic spirit of Secretary Rio, Commissioner Lagman, and Mr. Isaac, the Truth and Transparency or TNT trio. They perceived anomalies in the vote and are doing their duty to call attention to them. But I am concerned that the difficulty of the technical aspect of the allegation of automated cheating has become part of the proof of election fraud. Some time ago, I heard a lucid explanation of the whole IP issue from the national chair of the National Citizens Movement for Free Elections, or NAMFREL. I invited NAMFREL chair, Mr. Lito Averia, to join us tonight and discuss the issue. I also invited the member of the NAMFREL National Council with particular responsibility for information technology, Mr. J.R. Contreras. Thank you, Mr. Averia and Mr. Contreras, Lito and J.R., for joining us in the Public Square.
Thank you.
Let's start by setting the groundwork. What is Secretary Rio saying about the use of a private IP address?
In general, there are two types of IP addresses. One is public and one that's private. The private IP addresses are used within a network. So for example, in your office, you might have a local area network.
Before we proceed, I just want to get the allegation first. No? Let's define the allegation as asserted by Secretary Rio. He's saying that a certain proportion of precinct returns he found out were transmitted through the transparency server using a private IP address.
Okay.
Is that right?
Like I was saying, you have a local area network. The devices inside that network use a private IP address.
Okay.
When you go out to the internet, it's a public internet.
Okay.
So you get a public address for that.
Okay.
Now, transmission of the election returns, if you're asking that one, is done through the public network, the internet.
Okay.
But the source is
the
a
private
device which has a private IP address.
Okay.
That's how the simplest way that I can describe it.
Is there anything wrong with using the private IP address?
Private and public IP usually in the internet space works hand in hand.
Okay.
The reason for this, we're talking about a specific version of an IP address here. It's the version for IPv4.
Okay.
IPv4, since it's a finite sets of number yan
Okay.
has been depleted as early as 2000. So in the internet world, especially in the ISP world, the way for them to extend it is to use a combination of private and public IP. So
Okay.
the private IP is used within the private network, then it gets converted and masqueraded, and it goes out into the public. To use, say, private IP in a network in general, there's nothing wrong. It's a standard practice.
So it is in fact standard. Okay, before we dive deeper into that, I just want to understand the concept a little bit better. So the IP address, that's a set of
Four numbers.
Four
octets.
four octets,
Four octets.
right? And so all in all, it's a finite number of, what was that again? 16 squared or something.
Two
Right?
raised to this,
That's about 4.3 billion
All right.
IP addresses globally.
Yeah, and about a decade and a half or maybe even 2 decades ago, the number,
Has been
total number had been depleted.
Allocated and
Had already been allocated all over the world.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? So in order for us to continue using this version 4, we needed to use a combination now of private and public. That's what we're saying.
That's correct.
So, is there anything wrong then for the AES of May 2022 to have used private IP addresses?
There's nothing wrong there. We don't see anything wrong with the use. Like we said, internally in the network, you use private IP addresses, right? But when you transmit, if you're transmitting data, to another device in the network, then you go through the network of the telecommunications providers, which is basically in the internet infrastructure already,
Okay.
right? And that internet infrastructure uses public IP addresses. Now, how does it happen? When your device connects to the network, which has a private IP address, it connects to the network. That network responds by recognizing your private address, but for it to connect to the internet, it dynamically assigns an IP address, so that your data, when you transmit to another device in the network, will go through. Otherwise, it will not.
JR, earlier you showed me this image. Essentially, the AES, the Automated Election System, consists of 4 parts. So, at the level
Transmission.
of the transmission part, right? The level of the voter, so they engage with the VCM, right? The VCM, no IP address,
No IP address yan.
right? But there is a dongle
Yes.
attached.
Yes.
Attached only when it's time to transmit.
After the printing of the first 8 ER.
All right? So this would be the second element. This dongle, this has the IP address,
It will have the IP address.
the private IP address,
Well,
not necessarily.
not necessarily. Whatever it gets assigned to.
Okay. And then the third part,
It
the
communicates to a
through the cell sites.
to
No?
most of the dongle communicates to the cell site.
Okay.
Then that communicates to a central router or gateway.
Or the transparency server?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
To the gateway. Then the gateway connects it to whatever use of the customer. In this case, Comelec. Then the transparency server to the main server.
And because where we are right now, it's not possible for the data from a VCN using the dongle to reach the end of the transmission process purely through public IP addresses. It has to be a combination. Tama ba?
Pwedeng purely public if
Okay.
it was configured that way.
All right.
But at this stage, because of the depletion of IPv4, yun nga, there's a protocol called network address translation, or for
NAT.
carrier grade network address translation. The common practice is to use private network address, translate it into a public network address, then use that.
Okay.
For the case that we're pointing out, the basis of the complaint of Secretary Rio is the log file.
Okay.
Okay, the log file shows only a single IP address. From our analysis, kulang yun. Okay. First of all, when you do a communication, especially using private and public address, you have to show all the IP address involved.
Okay.
So there should be a source IP address, the gateway IP address, and the masqueraded IP address. When I say the masqueraded, it's the one that converts it from
translated.
private
To
to public.
Okay.
So yun yung isang challenge, you know. So I don't know why it's not present in the log file. It may be present in, kasi reception log yung nakuha nila eh. Maybe present in the VCM log.
Okay.
So maybe they can ask Comelec to give a sample of the VCM log.
Is that necessarily proof of fraud?
wala pa kami nakikitang problem on the technical side because it's a normal process.
Okay.
If you look at your mobile phone right now and you check the IP address of your mobile phone, most probably you will get a private IP address.
Okay.
And yet you can access the internet
All right.
because those process. Now, if you use tools like, for example, yung mga IP generation tools, it will show you what your public IP is. So what's the masqueraded IP is.
Okay.
So it's a normal process.
Lito, before you jump in, let me just backtrack a bit. I just want to make sure. So it is not possible to have configured the AES to use only public addresses.
It's possible, technically.
No, but
But that will require a whole set of setup. So, because from the setup that we know, they're not using any specialized device. They haven't applied for their own IP address.
okay.
So, for you to ride on, to be, kasi carrier agnostic, to be agnostic with the carrier, with the telco, the only way to do it is to do it through public-private.
Yeah. As a layman, I'm trying to understand, is that a shortcoming of the AES?
Hindi
That it
naman.
wasn't
Hindi
configured
naman.
that way?
Hindi naman.
No.
Hindi naman. In fact, from a technical point of view, you wouldn't want to do it na
Pure public.
pure public.
Because?
First, it will change the infrastructure. Then, ang challenge mo, you won't have enough resources to cover the 107,000 VCMs. So, to get 107,000 IP address ngayon, IPv4 public address, is near to impossible. So, you have to translate somehow.
Lito, can you help me understand yung concept again nung IP address, no? Yung parang I'm struck by the fact that it's called an address, no? So the metaphor here is like, it's a map, right? So it
Right.
allows you to locate something.
Right.
Can we work with that metaphor? Yeah.
Well, if you look at a map, it's a network of streets
Okay.
and avenues, right, through which cars travel, right? Let's say you're going to your office, from your home. Your home has an address, right? And you go to your office, which also has an address. So similarly, in the internet, if you want two devices to communicate, both of them would have addresses.
Okay.
Now, you asked earlier then yung configuration ng AES. Because of the limited number of IP addresses, we don't configure a system or a network to have hard-coded IP addresses. No? Because, again, we have to share the IP addresses. Everybody shares the available IP addresses.
Okay.
What may be fixed is the private IP address, but once it goes into the internet, again, it's dynamically assigned an IP address.
Dynamically assigned meaning
Meaning whatever IP address is available in a provider's address pool, pool of addresses.
it's not a person deciding, oh, this one go. No, it's
No, it's a
automatically
system.
generated.
It's a system.
In fact, there's a term for that. It's called DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. So meaning it's the server or the provider giving you the IP address.
Okay.
And that's prevalent both public and private IP.
So back to the metaphor, no? So you have an address,
Right.
right? What I understand you saying is that because of the limited number of available IP addresses, what you're actually doing now is converting that particular property into, let's say, a series of apartments.
Yep.
Now it's now 1A, 1B, 1C. Tama po ba yan?
It's a simple,
Yeah, it's a
Equivalent.
simple way of, yeah, okay.
Pwede na, malapit na.
Malapit na.
konti na lang.
Ganito yun. So yung building mo gets assigned a dynamic address.
Okay.
So yun yung first. Tapos within the building,
You have tenants.
there are tenants, di ba?
Okay.
But the tenants, yung guard na lang yung bahalang tumanggap
Okay.
because the building is masquerading for all the tenants.
Okay.
Then,
Masquerading,
that's
the technical term.
ano?
Alright.
So, the guard will receive all the mails. The guard now has the private address of everyone inside.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So, then
Okay.
distributes it. Then, if someone mails out, then they will use the assigned address. So, yun yung pinaka Siguro
So,
rough analogy.
if I get it, what Secretary Rio is saying is that he's pointing to the guard or pointing to the address of that building and saying, "Oh, lahat dumaan dito." Parang ganun
Mas
ba?
malalim pa. Okay.
Mas malalim
Kasi
pa.
yung guard, may public IP address yun.
Okay.
May public IP address yun. Kasi in the internet, before you get that public IP address, may NAT nga, ano? So, sa loob, it starts off with the private IP, gets converted into the gateway, the guard. So, the gateway, the guard has 2 IP addresses.
Okay.
Yung private IP niya, which is the gateway address,
Okay.
then the public, which was assigned by the telco.
Okay.
Ang challenge dito, hindi nakita nila Secretary Rio yung public IP, yung converted IP address. Both, 2 IP yung nawawala dyan sa logs, ano? Yung source, so yung tenant na private IP, saka yung assigned na public. Yung masqueraded actually, yung masqueraded IP address.
Okay.
And that happens at the time of transmission.
Okay.
Once transmission is done, it's completed, pwede nang i-release yung IP address, public IP address that was assigned.
Kasi tapos na, ginamit
So,
na. Nagamit na.
Pero, ako, yung isang challenge kasi, wala sa logs eh.
Yes.
Yeah.
They could have logged it. I mean,
That's what you're saying, right? That it's
They could have
possible
logged it. Yes.
that there's a record of these private address. Ang nakita lang yung guard.
gateway.
Yung gateway.
Gateway.
Oh, and then wow, ang daming mail nitong
Gwardiya lahat nagpadala.
parang suspicious.
Suspicious
Yes.
talaga.
Yeah. But what you're saying is that it's possible that there's a record and that's what they're asking for also. Saan galing? Or
Matatrace yun eh. If the program was written in a way to log the source IP, the gateway IP, and the masqueraded IP, you will see 3 IP addresses there.
okay. But again,
Could have cleared it.
just by this fact alone, this is not proof of election fraud, right?
No.
Hindi pa.
Hindi. Ang
It's simply how the internet works.
may isa pang
So, parang the medium and the message eh.
Okay.
Iba yung medium, iba yung message.
may isa pang challenge kasi. We had the chairman of the Commission on Election claiming, pronouncing, saying na all of the VCM has 192.168.0.2 address.
Okay.
Even from the technical point of view, parang hindi plausible yon.
Okay. So mali siya.
Baka sinasabi niya, they have all the same gateway address. Pwede yun. Kasi it's a normal, ano. Pero, matitrace mo dapat pa rin.
Yeah.
So, those are the 2 things, ano. So, Secretary Rio and his team is looking at the log files. Na kulang, unfortunately kulang. Yun yung isang reform na pwede namin itulak sa NAMFREL to improve that. Tapos, yung message ni Chairman Garcia na 192.168.0.2 is the source IP address. So,
Okay.
And we've been telling them, hindi po yun ganun. Okay? From what we know, ano? Then, again, we're saying this from what we experience and what we know. It's only Comelec who can say na, hindi, baka sabihin nila, yun talaga eh. I mean, maybe they did a technology that forces it to masquerade under 0.2. Highly improbable, pero until they state it, until they show it to us, ito yung analysis namin from what we know based on our experience and our review of their
Yeah.
system.
Let's spend a little time also on what Chairman George Garcia said. And also, like I said, this has gained some traction. Jerry, we were just talking about, we saw this new
Social media posts.
social media post. No, but we can also talk about that. But I just want to go back to that first issue first of the private internet protocol addresses. By itself, they're not proof of fraud. In fact, it's just proof that they use the internet. Tama po ba?
Yun yung isa.
That's correct.
Kasi nakikita ko rin, no disrespect to my fellow journalists, but I've seen a columnist or two describe this as secret private IP addresses.
naman,
No? So yung pagdagdag ng secret, parang
Hindi naman,
there's something behind it. No?
Ganito yan, marami yan. There's a lot of networks use private IP addresses. In particular nga, yung 192.168.0.2.
0.2.
Right? Unfortunately, it's not known to the public. So in that sense, it's secret.
Okay.
But if you research it, I mean, you go to
Nobody's hiding it.
nobody's hiding it. But you go to a cafe, a restaurant, a mall, or any building
No, not
that
even that.
offers
Your mobile phone right now.
your mobile phone.
right now.
It's there. The private address is there. It's all over the place, right? Except that yun nga, no, especially for a non-techie person, you don't know how the that black box with antennas sticking out, how they are configured,
Okay.
right? But 192.168.0.2 is there. It's ubiquitous, kumbaga.
Not necessarily that too, ano? 192.168.x.x
X.
is part of the private IP range. Ano, may dalawa pang
Meron
set,
yan.
172, tapos yung 10.10.0.0.
Oh.
So, tatlo yan na inassign na to be part of the private IP block. Ano? So, if you put an address 192.168.x.x, it won't be routed to the internet.
Yeah.
It has to use a gateway. Again, I pointed out sa dalawang challenge. Unang challenge, yung statement ni Chairman Garcia.
Yeah.
Tapos, the lack of information on the logs. Kasi nasa log isang IP lang. If you look at it based on that, may question mark.
Let me describe further the log. Ito yung hinihingi ni
Secretary.
General Rio from that for the telco logs to be released. Ano ba yung nasa telco log? The telco log contains a record, let's say, of all calls.
Okay.
Okay. You have a cell phone number calling another number. So you have a source and a destination. Right? And then all the other transmission-related data, like the time of the call, the date of the call, the call duration. Right? That's recorded in what is called the call data record.
Yeah. CDR.
Noong araw, when you receive a bill, nakadetail yon lahat.
I remember.
Remember.
Nakakalma na.
Even
Billing
the
statement.
cell site, na originating
That's right.
cell site, nandun. Eh ngayon kasi puro plan, so summary na lang yung binibigay sa atin. But if you look, the olden days statement of accounts, nakadetail lahat yung pati yung text message or yung text paggamit ng
How
text.
many text messages? Yeah.
Oo.
Yeah.
Right? So, ganun yung transmission log.
Okay.
But the transmission log in this case has a lot more details in it. Yun nga yung sinasabi ni JR na the different IP addresses have been recorded in the transmission log.
Is this a permanent record or can it be erased?
Oh, everything can be erased.
Everything can be erased.
Pero yun nga, clear ko lang, hindi na rin uso kasi yung CDR ngayon.
Yeah.
Okay, what they have most probably, I don't know their network, but having run an ISP before, most probably they have what you call the AAA record, authentication, accounting, and authorization. Nandun yun. Makikita mo when the connection was initiated, when was it disconnected, what IP address was assigned, what was used, and everything,
That would be the minimum or that's a completely...
minimum yun.
Minimum yun.
Sa AAA logs, the telco might have it. Tagal na nun. Hindi masyado malaki yan. I mean, it's a big record. So they may have kept it. Pero yun nga, on the technical side kasi, ang position namin, the transmission should always be agnostic.
Meaning it doesn't care which
Doesn't care.
telco
Carrier.
is used.
In other countries, for example, in the US, some state, alam mo paano nila pinadadala yung result? Email.
Okay.
Because it doesn't matter. And kami naman, based on the technical research and based on what we know about the process, mukhang wala dun yung issue. Siguro punta lang ako dun sa closing process ng VCM. Once every voter has cast their vote, a closing process would happen. Once they close the VCM, it will stop it from receiving more ballots. Then it will go into the reporting. The first report that comes out is the first copies of the eight copies ng election return. The election returns are the total na. After the first 8 copies are printed, then kukunin nung EB, the EB will get the USB stick, stick it at the back of the VCM, then proceeds to transmit. So then it will transmit the record. If it's successful, takes out the USB stick, proceeds in printing the next 22 copies. So, tigil muna ako sa first 8 copies. The mere fact that you printed the first 8 copy in prison is a form of protection already. So, yun ang dapat natin bantayan. Ito bang nakalagay ditong total, tumugma ba yan sa itatransmit? Yung first 8 copy ba, tumugma dun sa next 22 copy? So, yun yung must check sa akin. Ano? It doesn't matter how I send it. Kasi kung pagdududahan natin yun, then we'll have to secure everything in a ridiculous way that might not be feasible on the financial side, ano? So, yun yung basis din namin ng ano.
Lito?
One of the ways that NAMFL's checking it, we developed an NAMFL app.
Yeah.
And one of the features is to allow our observers to take a photo of the ERs that is posted at the polling precinct.
Okay.
No? That posted ER is part of the first 8 copies.
All right.
It's one of the first 8 copies. So our volunteer takes a photo of the ER, sends it to NAMFL servers. The NAMFL server would convert it into processable data, yung plain text na siya. No? And then we compare that data with what we received electronically via the transparency server.
What was your assessment?
100% match.
100% for almost, well,
But what was it?
6,000.
We only had
What was
a
the
sample of
coverage?
6,000.
Almost 6,000 samples.
We have
All right.
a sample of 6,000.
Was it a random sample or?
Well, volunteer sample yan eh. Kasi
Volunteer
ano to eh,
sample.
crowdsourcing ito eh. In fact, we want to do it. Also, we have to take note, we only compare the president's position
Okay.
para mabilis, ano?
All right.
So, what hap-
6,000 volunteers, no? How many? So just 6,000 precincts.
Not necessarily, may mga doble.
May mga double yan.
I see.
Kasi in the world of crowdsourcing, you want people to submit as much as
That's right.
possible.
Okay.
The more it compares,
Okay.
the stronger your data. Yun yung principle. So, we have to take note yung source namin, ano, for that, ano. It's the one posted by law after the first 8 copies. One should be posted, sabi ng law, immediately on a well-lighted place within the prison. Yan, nasa batas, ha? Hindi yan sa IRR, hindi yan sa general instruction. In fact, yan yung isa naming pinaglalaban kasi sa general instruction, yung mga teacher, iniipon muna nila. Pipirmahan, tap mark, saka sila maglalagay. Yun daw kasi nasa general instruction. Sabi namin, hindi, by law, dapat ilabas mo na yan. Wala naman sinabing thumb mark mo, ano. Para alam na kagad yung resulta, walang delay. So, yun yung basis namin nun. That,
Where would those be now? Those posted after the first 8 copies.
the EB will retrieve it. But within those, di ba, 30 copies siya. no?
Yeah, but like today, if we were to search for that,
The posted copy is retrieved by the election officer. It goes to the election officer of the locality,
okay.
pero,
city or municipality.
pero 30 copies yan, ano? So, some of our volunteers, may kopya kami of some of those ERs. Some other groups, like PPCRV, they were able to retrieve 86,000 out of the 107,000.
I'm sorry.
86,000 of the 107,000. So, yun naman yung ginawa nila. That's
Yeah.
the check that they did. They compared that. So,
Yeah. So, as a way to validate exactly how the votes went, or at least as far as the votes for president went, that would be, you suggest, a better process to check those rather than calling for the CDRs.
kasi
Ganun ba yun? Is it
kasi
an
sa
either
akin,
or
yung
thing?
CDR wouldn't, the AA, I wouldn't call it the CDR, no? The
Just the
AAA,
AAA,
record. The AAA record will only show you the transmission
Authentication.
path,
Not the contents.
accounting,
accounting and
authorization.
authorization.
no?
Right?
So, it won't show you data. It will only show you the path. Okay? And again, for us, it has to be agnostic. Eh.
Okay.
Kasi pag pinagdudahan natin yung telco, pagdududahan mo na lahat. Ano? The mere fact it was printed prior to connecting a network device, prior to transmission, yun ang puprotektahan natin. So, and that's the effort that we did. That's the effort that some other organization did to check what was printed is what was actually received in the
Okay.
transmission.
Unfortunately, COMELEC Chair George Garcia issued a misstatement, as you pointed out. No? Was this in fact a misstatement, or was he accidentally revealing the truth? I mean, how should we understand this? I mean, I assume he's getting advice from his IT people.
Yun nga yung worry namin eh. It should be the IT team answering this, not the chairman. The chairman is well educated, is well experienced, but I think he's not in the IT field. I mean, we have to accept that fact, you know?
Okay.
There are groups within COMELEC who could have answered it more expressively. You know? Yan yung first. Ano? The next is the lack of logs. Dalawa yan. Ano?
Yeah.
So, yung log na pinadala nila, kulang eh.
Reception pa.
Well, not only reception, kulang na mismo yung pagkakasulat. The one who wrote the program to log it, kulang. Ano?
Kulang, the data that was collected is lacking.
So it's the one who developed it. Sayang, sana dinagdag na. Then I'll push it even further.
Sure.
The one that we have access to through the transparency server, kulang na kulang. What we get is, well, even groups like Rappler will only get a CSV file, which is the result already. Isa yan sa tinutulak namin sa NAMFREL. Be more transparent. If they use, for example, standard data packets, what we're pushing out, what we're requesting is a package called EML, Election Markup Language. Ano? If they use it, lahat doon hagip mo. Hindi mo naman kailangan itago yan eh. You will see dates, for example, what time the VCM closed, what time it tried to transmit, who were the EB who signed it. Dapat yun makuha eh. But yun nga, they abbreviated some of the things, whether by design or whatever reason, nakakahinayang lang. It's
But
there.
but these multiple lacks, no? Kulang sa ganito, kulang sa ganyan, are they necessarily proof of fraud?
Not a proof of fraud, but it makes you doubt. Okay? Yan yung isang challenge. Kasi nga, so from our end sa NAMFREL, medyo dun sa transmission side, we don't see. Okay? Until COMELEC shows the actual network, we don't see yet any technical proof that fraud happened there. Kasi nga, for me, without checking it, may printed DR eh. E di kumpara mo lang doon sa receive. So, kaya nga yung lumabas na meme na kung ano yung pinadala, si Pedro yung nagpadala, si Juan yung nagpadala.
Yeah.
Sa akin, it doesn't matter eh. Nagpadala siya ng 1,000, natanggap ba 1,000? Now, on that, sa pera padala, would it matter? I sent 1,000, the person received 1,000, would it matter whoever sent it? Kasi si Pedro doon became the masquerade for someone else. So it doesn't matter. Ang problema, 1,000 yung pinadala, 500 lang yung tanggap, that's a problem. And where's the proof of that? We have the printed ER and the reception ER. So sa transmission, wala pa kaming makitang basis that there's fraud there.
The only data set that we receive actually is the electronic copy of the ER through the transparency server. No? And what we received actually is processed election returns. The original format that is transmitted from the VCM is, in the last election, is what is called
Protocol buffer.
protocol buffer. No? When it gets to the transparency server, it gets processed and converted into plain text. Yun yung tinatawag natin na comma-separated values,
CSVs.
which even media and Rappler would receive. We don't receive the proto-buffer format data file. And yun nga, sabi ni JR, we've been pushing for the originally generated data from the VCM. Because by converting it, again, you're creating another point of doubt. Was there manipulation during the conversion process? We don't know.
And we've seen problems in the conversion before. Alala niyo yung ENY issue, di ba? Because of the conversion of the
In
ENY.
2016.
Two elections, 3 elections ago, nagka-problema. So, kami, if they don't want to convert to an EML format, they can keep it in protocol buffer format, protobuf. Kasi bigay na. Bigay na sa lahat.
As is.
As is. Kasi marami dumakitang data. Then you can see log files, the forensics and everything. Mawawala halalos yung duda. So yun yung from this transmission issue, yun yung, well, from the technical point of view, yung statement ni Chairman Garcia, the lack of logs, caused this confusion. So, challenging. Even for us.
So how should we resolve this?
From the technical point of view,
What if the logs no longer exist?
sa tingin ko nandun ilabas lang. I mean, just show the logs, For this transmission, kami rin kasi sa number, we still have an issue. I mean, we're not happy, So, remember, yung transmission yung pinag-uusapan. Kami, we step back one step earlier. Yung VCM, tama ba yung pagbilang niyan?
Yeah.
Okay? Remember, one of the issue that's part of our report is that we were never shown, the public was never shown, and it's part of the law and part of the process, that you should do a final build. The final build would yield what you call a system checksum.
The hash code.
The hash code, the system checksum hash code. Pinakita nila lahat ng component, yung system din nila pinakita. Then all of a sudden, they sign. This is siguro an 8-hour video. We tried reviewing it several times. Wala talaga, Then, hindi mo na mapupuna yon. Kaya lang, si Lito, one early morning, tried comparing the two hash code versus the one that we saw during the end-to-end demonstration. Aba, yung isang byte hindi nag-compare. Number 8 and letter B is wrong. So,
What does that mean?
well, we complained, So, that means what we reviewed in the source code may not be the program installed in the VCM. So, issue sa amin yun, We complained, we wrote 3 letters, even when we were part of the Comelec Advisory Committee, we even raised that with the Comelec Advisory Committee. And actually, when we spoke with the chairman, we told him that again. In fairness to him naman, sabi niya, hindi, papakita namin. So, pero that's still a pending issue for us, And that shows you the lack of transparency within all the process, Especially nitong 2022 because of the pandemic, marami kaming hindi nakita, In fact, for example, yung writing lang ng SD card, if the new commissioners didn't come in, the new chairman didn't come in, hindi nila i-open yung Santa Rosa location where we can see, we can visit. So, they use the pandemic as the basis to block. So, medyo mahirap, So, nandyan na Yung sinasabi, it's all there. Why not show it? Why cast doubt? So, the VCM hash code, if it's really that, then why not show it? Yun lang naman hinihiling namin If the logs are there, why not show it?
Then, I think the telco log should still be there. It must be there. Remember that the TNT trio filed a petition with the court, the Supreme Court, the mandamus petition, seeking a protection order first, preservation order to preserve the data. So, it must still be there if the telcos are made to comply with the order. Unfortunately, there has not been, the court, I think, has not acted on that petition. The only action taken was ordering the COMELEC to respond or to comment on the petition. Hanggang dun lang siya. But I think also the COMELEC took action. It posted some data sets initially, which they called the transmission log. When I personally looked at it,
It's a reception.
It's a reception log. It's not a transmission log. And then they posted what is called the raw files. Again, the raw files purportedly is the transmission log, but we're saying it's lacking in data. So that might not be the whole thing. All of this, like I said earlier, these sets of data are pieces of the bigger jigsaw puzzle because there's a lot of data all over the place. Now, this telco logs, for example, is imbued with public interest. No? So when the public asks for it, the commission should release the data, without maybe an order from the court for them to release it, because it's not secret to begin with.
Masalimuot.
Yes.
Kami, ang paniwala namin, the technicality shouldn't be a factor eh.
Unfortunately, it is.
Yun nga eh.
Yes.
The problem is, nagkakaroon na ngayon ng trust issue, whoever's running it, ano? Remember, it's practically the same system that we've been running since 2010.
Yeah, that's right.
So, for example, if you're on the losing party, it may be the same system that made you win or lose. So, yun yung challenge. Eh. So, there would be questions, ano? And we believe that, even in AMFREL, our position is private voting, public counting. One of the things that we're pushing is you count on the present level. Whether it's manual, whether it's computer-aided, whether it's barcode, that's what we've been pushing. Kasi you preserve the data source. Once you preserve the data source, present 100, you take pictures of that, everyone has copy, there's no amount of manipulation that you can do to change it on the central server. Kasi you have the, you have the sources. So that's what we're pushing. And the challenge is, yun nga, because of the technicality, very few people would understand the whole process. Even for us in AMFREL, we have a whole team dedicated on the technical side. We even question ourselves, do you have that portion? Do they do this? They're a bit restrictive on the source code review. There's a lot of areas to improve, to improve the transparency.
I've always thought, borrowing from E.F. Schumacher, that essentially there are two kinds of questions, the convergent question and the divergent question. So a convergent question is, once you figure out something like 1 + 1 = 2, the answer stays the same. No? I mean, it converges on that point. So what is the fastest way to restaurant X? You can determine that based on your location. But a divergent question would be, it depends. No? What is the best dish in restaurant X, right? People would have difference of opinion. I've always thought that on the technical side, the questions eventually become convergent, right? But right now, Secretary Rio, for instance, and then those who have written about his allegations have pointed to, some IT people saying this and that, no? Where is the consensus of the IT community? Is there such a thing as an IT community consensus as far as the May 22 elections are concerned?
I don't know which is the IT community. Within our small group, we feel that the logs lacking. That's number one. Then some of the statement coming out of COMELEC is incorrect.
Okay.
Or if not incorrect, incomplete.
What's the consensus on Secretary Rio's allegations?
Medyo it lacks technical backing to prove it. Kasi nga, it's so easy to disprove.
Yeah.
If one thing that they could have done is ask for a BCM log. Wag na yung 107,000. Just to sample. 1 for every 1,000. 107 BCM logs. Check the BCM logs. Or from the 20,000 that they mentioned, the 20,000 to 20,300 BCM that they mentioned, that transmitted, pick one. Search for the printed ER. Maybe they can ask those who've collected the ER. Marami naman yan eh. The political part, minority, majority, baka meron kami, baka meron yung iba pang choose. Mag-random sample siya. Tignan natin yung resulta doon sa ER. Tignan natin ano yung nasa records database. That will end the issue on the transmission. So,
the other source might be the random manual audit. Remember that the random manual audit, the way it's conducted, it's actually manual counting of the votes, based on the ballots. And then the resulting count will be compared with the VCM count. Okay? And the RMA came out with 99.9496 accuracy rate. No? So what they can do is out of the 20,300 VCMs that they claim to be questionable, or if they have copies of the ERs, try to look for a matching ER. Or the ERs kasi are identified by the clustered precinct numbers. So you can look at the clustered precinct numbers, use that to search for the printed copy. So, yun, paghambing mo yun, you try to match it and see if they really do match. If not, then there's a big question mark.
For me, the most concerning allegation of or discovery of Secretary Rio is the one is his discovery that something like 20 million votes were transmitted within the first hour, and before. And he said if he were to do a time and motion study, it would have been impossible. And I think the whole thing, this whole IP private IP address discovery is supposed to augment that that finding of his. What would be an alternative explanation?
Well, that first, it's not the individual votes that's transmitted. The 20 million votes within 1 hour are the individual votes in vote count. So the 20 million vote counts are from like 39,000 VCMs or polling precincts. Okay. And that would be like 39,000 transmissions of ERs, right? I computed it, and it comes out that the rate is like 12 point something ERs, 12.38 ERs per second.
Okay.
The size of the electronically transmitted ER is only about 10 KB, 10 kilobytes. And that would be equivalent to like 10 pages of text.
Okay.
Wala pa. Wala pa.
That's the estimate, right? So, the 12 ERs per second, it's possible to transmit that. It's a small payload. No?
So what you're saying is that the 39,000 election returns
Transmitted within the first hour
is
possible.
Okay, let me go back to the last 3 elections. If you compare the rate of the transmission of the last 3 elections, it would average out.
I see.
Hindi in fact, remember this election in 2022 is the first time that we used 4G. Usually 3G lang ginagamit natin. Thanks to Secretary Rio and his push for the third telco, tatlo na yung naging SIM card na ginagamit ng EB on the present level. It improved the transmission, But we even checked, kung if you compare it, barring some of the issues, kasi di ba nagkaroon tayo ng 7-hour glitch and everything, barring that issue, if you compare the 2022 with 2019, mas mabilis yung 2019. Except that the race was tight, So, iba yun, But, even on the technical side, napakadaling ipaliwanag nun.
For me, the least compelling of his arguments is his argument about surveys. I asked him here, and I said, how do you take account of the surveys, no? And he said, well, he didn't have a very convincing answer to the surveys, but we're all familiar with the surveys, and I've also I had a chance to take a look at opposition conducted surveys, essentially showing the same result, no? How would that factor in? Does that mean that election fraud, if it was committed, was done in such a way as to mirror the ongoing survey results? Ganun ba yun? I'm trying to wrap my head around that. I mean,
it's hard, even for us. On our side, kasi when we audit, for example, the election system, we don't even look at the results. You try to protect all paths, all checks, instead of looking at the results. And incidentally, the data yielded was the results. So yun yung challenge din sa amin. I mean, if you're going to use, for example, the political side na may survey, maraming kakaiba eh. So for example, one of the first election in which the vice president has more votes than the president. Itong election natin. In the last two
but in fact-
presidential election that was AES, 2010, the amount of people who didn't vote for the vice president position was almost 2 million, 2016, the amount of people who didn't vote for the vice presidential position grew even further. Then pagdating ng 2022, you have very low non-votes on the vice president position. In fact, it's the vote of the vice president is higher than the president. So, from a political survey point of view, bakit? Hindi namin masagot. From a technical point of view, hindi rin namin maintindihan. Bakit? Imagine the 2010 and 2016 election, highly contested on vice presidential position. And yet you have 2 million to 3 million people not voting based on the record.
Well, politically, it might be a reversion to the mean, kasi Gloria had more votes than Erap in 1998 when she won as vice president. Noli De Castro had more votes than...
Pero hindi yan AES.
Hindi, exactly. Yeah, hindi AES, that's right.
So from our record, ongoing computerization, 2010, yun yung nakita namin. So it's the first time within AES.
But what does that mean? What are the implications?
On the technical side, isa sa nakikita namin, maybe design of the ballot, maybe the way they put the numbering. Kasi isa rin na question namin. Baka pwedeng tuloy-tuloy lang yung numbering. So, kasi one of the challenge, for example, even in the mock election, pag tinignan mo kung sino nanalo, yung madaling makita eh.
Yeah.
So, sa last mock election, na nanalong barangay captain dun sa isang barangay, the name was letter A eh. Angelina Jolie yata nanalo. Kasi pag tinignan mo dun sa sample
Yeah, that's right.
It's easy eh.
Yes.
So for those not doing much of the thinking, much of the discernment, yun eh. Baka. We don't know yet. We don't have a technical explanation yet.
There's a study on that on the ballot design. Lalo na yung ballot natin is by marking. Tapos alphabetic pa yung arrangement. And then row-wise. The first name on the ballot, which is on the left upper corner of that section, would likely...
That's why we had party lists named, one something.
Kasi pag nag-sort
In the beginning, that was done. That's right. Yeah. I'm sorry, we're running long. Actually, I have so many more questions, but I'm mindful of your time and also our audience's time. Maybe I can we can end our discussion this way. Is it possible and is it desirable on the part of the, let's say, IT community to convene a high level roundtable to talk about these allegations and maybe define some of the parameters? I'm still at that. I'm in the framework of IT. They should settle on convergent questions. No, kasi parang it's I don't know if this is an apt analogy, but baka you would have some doctors, prescribing ivermectin, but the consensus of the larger medical communities, no, that's not the way to, treat the COVID, right? I don't know if that's the right analogy but I am looking as a layman for a more definitive intervention from the IT community.
Yeah, it's like writing a scientific paper out of a research, for example. Before you publish that scientific paper, you get your peers to review it. So, peer review might be one of the options. No? So, IT naman yung pinag-uusapan. Ito yung paper ni General Rio. Okay, maybe we can ask the IT community to...
There's been actual some talks within a small group that
smaller group
na sabihin gawin natin. We just don't want to antagonize both both parties. Siyempre, once the IT group, for example, converges on an answer, may tatamaan.
Yeah.
may tatamaan. So we're just trying to be careful on that. But yes, we've been trying to organize a group na to answer the technicalities of it. May challenge lang konti kasi syempre we're still asking information from COMELEC. Kasi most of, even our case, most of the things that we know are assumptions. Unless they disclose it, then it becomes a fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, yung peer review, it happened. No? Remember the 60-30-10 pattern? Paper
Oh, that
on
yeah,
that?
that
That was peer reviewed.
That's right. But, Secretary is not talking about that. No, that's a different issue altogether. At any rate, wow. Thank you very much. Thank you, NAMFREL Chair Lito Averia and NAMFREL National Council Member J.R. Contreras. This has been a most instructive conversation. And thank you for all that you do to help defend the public square. Many thanks.
Yes, a pleasure.
That's it for us tonight. As always, the next step for engaged citizens is to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. See you in the public square. This is John Neri. Thank you and good night.